February 2024. A stalled storm system unleashes nearly a season's worth of rain over Texas in less than 3 days, trapping entire neighborhoods before warnings even go out, turning highways into rivers, and exposing how unprepared America's defenses truly are. The disaster America feared for decades has arrived, but the way it unfolded will leave you questioning what's really protecting us and whether this could happen again sooner than anyone expects. At the heart of the disaster, a nameless storm system refused to budge. For nearly 3 days, a dense low-pressure cell hovered above Texas, trapping moisture and feeding relentless bands of rain across the state. Meteorologists at the Texas Division of Emergency Management watched satellite loops as the system stalled, its cloud shield locked in place by stubborn atmospheric patterns. Forecast models, usually reliable for tracking cold fronts or Gulf hurricanes, offered little comfort. The models showed the same thing, run after run, a stationary engine, drawing in warm, saturated air from the Gulf of Mexico and wringing it out over the same ground hour after hour. Rainfall charts from the period told the story in numbers that barely seemed possible. In Dallas, gauges recorded over 14 inches of rain in just 24 hours, more than the city typically receives in an entire spring. Across the hill country, radar estimates showed pockets topping 20 inches, saturating ground already primed by a wet winter. The deluge overwhelmed every historical precedent for February rainfall in Texas. Local meteorologists described the event as a rain bomb, with precipitation rates spiking to 2 or even 3 inches per hour at times. The National Weather Service issued round after round of flash flood watches, but the system's stubbornness outpaced even the most dire warnings. Pressure maps from the first week of February showed a classic atmospheric lock: a high-pressure ridge to the east, a trough to the west, and the storm wedged between, unable to move. With each passing hour, the water table rose and rivers across the state began to swell. For forecasters tracking the event in real time, it was a nightmare scenario, one that models had hinted could happen in a warmer, wetter world, but rarely with this intensity or duration. The sheer volume of water falling from the sky set the stage for what would come next, as the state's rivers and reservoirs strained against their limits. At 3:56 a.m., the first river gauges along the Trinity began to fail. Readings shot past flood stage, then vanished as sensors disappeared beneath the current. In Oak Cliff, engineers monitoring the city's drainage network watched as water levels jumped by feet, not inches. The main channel of the Trinity rose more than 32 feet in less than 2 hours, breaching retaining walls and sending a sheet of water racing through side streets. The Brazos surged by 28 feet, submerging entire stretches of farmland and swallowing the lower floors of riverside homes. On the ground, the pace was relentless. In Dallas, the Oak Cliff neighborhood disappeared under 5 feet of water before sunrise. Manhole covers rattled, then exploded upwards as storm drains reversed under pressure. Engineers from the city's public works department, standing in ankle-deep water at 2 a.m., radioed in warnings that the system was overwhelmed beyond design. The drainage network, built for storms half this size, funneled floodwater back into the streets. By dawn, the roar of collapsing infrastructure echoed across the city. Concrete culverts cracked open and water gushed through ruptured seams in the roadbed. Retaining walls along the river buckled, giving way in sudden bursts that sent shockwaves through neighborhoods. At the Oak Cliff Viaduct, engineers recorded the last radio transmission before their truck was forced back by rising water. All lines are blown out. Repeat, all drains are blown out. Amid the chaos, the boundary between river and city vanished. Water surged through the intersections, carrying debris and vehicles downstream. The city's emergency sirens blared, but for many, the warning came too late. The speed of the flood left little time for escape, as the physical barriers designed to protect the city gave way, one after another. As the floodwaters surged through Texas neighborhoods, families scrambled for any escape. In Oak Cliff, the Martinez family climbed onto their roof just after 5 a.m., water already swallowing their porch and creeping up the windows. For 8 hours, they huddled together, watching debris and entire vehicles float by, the sound of distant sirens blending with the rush of the current. Cell service flickered in and out, but their oldest daughter managed a single call to 911 before the line went dead. She was one of over 4,200 callers who jammed emergency lines that morning, desperate for help that was stretched impossibly thin. Helicopters circled above as daylight broke, searching for stranded residents. Across the state, more than 5,000 people found shelter in school gyms and churches, arriving soaked and shaken, clutching what little they could carry. Some had waited through the night on rooftops or in attics, signaling with flashlights or waving towels as rescue boats passed by in the darkness. Volunteers handed out blankets and bottled water, but the shock was written on every face. Children asked when they could go home, but for many, there was no home to return to. The scale of suffering was measured not just in numbers, but in the silent exhaustion of families who had lost everything overnight. The economic toll stunned even veteran disaster analysts. Early estimates put Texas's direct losses at $12.5 billion, with over 1,200 businesses wiped out in a matter of days. Insurance adjusters struggled to keep up as claims poured in for homes, vehicles, and entire commercial districts. Many small businesses, already operating on thin margins, learned their policies didn't cover the full scope of flood damage. For entire stretches of Dallas and the Hill Country, the financial shock rippled outward, lost jobs, shuttered storefronts, and empty warehouses where inventory once stood. Dr. Lisa Chen, a climate scientist at the University of Texas, pointed to a deeper cause behind the devastation. She explained that for every 1 degree Celsius of warming, the atmosphere can hold about 7% more water vapor. That extra moisture doesn't just linger in the air, it comes down in bursts, turning once rare deluges into something closer to routine. Flood frequency models, once based on the idea of a 100-year event, now struggle to keep pace as records are shattered year after year. Texas's levee systems tell a similar story. Nearly 68% are rated as outdated, designed for storms that no longer match the reality of today's climate. As the costs pile up, so do the questions about whether the country's infrastructure is prepared for what lies ahead. In the aftermath, state and federal officials moved quickly to draft new plans aimed at breaking the cycle of disaster and recovery. Texas lawmakers introduced an $8 billion green infrastructure bill designed to fund projects that could both slow floodwaters and restore natural drainage. The proposal earmarked money for expanded retention basins, urban wetlands, and riverbank restoration, measures intended to absorb rainfall before it could overwhelm cities downstream. In Austin, a pilot program tested artificial intelligence in flood forecasting. The system processed radar, river gauge, and weather data in real time, issuing warnings that reached emergency managers up to 40% faster than traditional alerts. Early results showed that even a few minutes lead time could mean the difference between a safe evacuation and a desperate rescue. Policymakers and engineers called for a new approach to urban planning, one that treated floodplains as off-limits for future development. Regional flood planning groups began mapping vulnerable areas, proposing buyouts for homes and businesses in the highest risk zones. The state's water board released updated design standards for drainage and levee systems, factoring in the reality of heavier rains and faster river surges. Across Texas, the debate shifted from whether to act to how quickly upgrades could be built. The sense of urgency was unmistakable, but the question remained whether these measures would be enough before the next storm arrived. Today, climate-driven floods strike with increasing force across Texas and beyond. Outdated infrastructure and ignored warnings leave millions at risk. The next disaster isn't a question of if, but when. Our choices now decide whether these warnings become history or prophecy. Join the conversation below.